everyone. Welcome back inside Centura Health Training Center for another episode of Broncos Now. As always, I'm your host, Sydney Jones, and coming up on today's episode, we'll hear from head coach Sean Payton and several players as they take a look back at Sunday's loss. Plus, Broncos lead writer Eric Delala joins the show for a game recap. All that and more coming up. Broncos fell 17-16 at home in Week 1 to the Las Vegas Raiders. Not the outcome Denver was hoping for in their season opener, but there are positives that can be taken out of Sunday's game. Head coach Sean Payton discussed his thoughts on the offense's performance and what they can take out of Week 1 moving forward.
I just finished talking about this with our team. It's a bit unusual in that it's rare both teams end up with just 6 possessions. In other words, points then become at a premium. Generally speaking, you're between 10 and 12 possessions a game. So part of it was a result of both teams having long, sustained drives, overcoming some third downs, maybe some penalties that keep drives moving. But it was a little unusual that way. Obviously, the thing offensively that maybe stood out is there weren't any explosives. I mean, we had a couple plays that would measure into the explosive category, but it was unique that way in a game where you didn't have the same amount of possessions you were used to, and then the margins quickly shift. So if you told me we were going to win the turnover battle, we were going to win the rushing battle against that team, I would have been real happy and said that more than likely we were going to win the game, but it wasn't the case.
Both running backs Samaje Perine and inside linebacker Josie Jewell also spoke on the team's unusual 6 possessions and how that can be used as a strength moving forward.
Yeah, it's going to be a huge strength for us just to keep drives going, just to take time off of the clock, just to wear people down. And when we get the explosives figured out, then it's really gonna be difficult to stop us because you have to worry about the run game, the quick passes, but also the deep threat. So you can't just load the box all the time. It's definitely gonna help out, as the season goes along, and we'll just see where it takes us.
Definitely longer than usual. I mean, we love when our offense is out there driving the ball, eating up some clock. But then their offense did some of the same to us. So. It did feel pretty weird, but we got to be able to, like I said earlier, we got to be able to find a way to get off on third down, not have those stupid penalties, and just be able to execute on coach's calls. So it did feel weird, but those are things we can also stop, and we can give our offense a couple more possessions by getting a couple of stops earlier.
Samaje also talked about his thoughts on the team's 1-2 punch with him and running back Javonte Williams.
Yeah, it's working out great. I mean, obviously it was only the first game. But, I can see us really, down the stretch, going into the third and fourth quarter, really leaning on defenses when they're getting tired. And, we're still relatively fresh because, we're 2 physical backs. And, some teams just aren't going to want to go against that for 4 quarters. But, yesterday I feel like was a decent debut. Would have been great to get the win, but there was some things that we have to clean up, but there was also lots of positives to take away from this game, and I'm just excited to see how we keep moving forward and how we respond.
The Broncos defense held Raiders running back Josh Jacobs to just 48 yards on 19 carries, and Josie Jewell said today that he was impressed with the team's physical front.
I thought our D lineman did a great job all game of keeping the lanes pretty tight for us, Alex and I, to run around, even the safeties every once in a while to fit with us. And they did a great job. I mean, you saw a lot of the tackles were pretty close, tight tackles. We were in the box. So I thought the D line did a great job. Safeties did a great job. Corners did a great job of tackling. And that's what we have to do week in and week out.
Head coach Sean Payton detailed how he saw the team bounce back in difficult situations yesterday and what his expectations are this week.
Yeah, I mean, look, I thought there was grit, toughness. I thought, we battled hard, all of those things. And yet it's disappointing you don't come away with the win. My expectations this week are, we're back at it. We're back to work. And we get ready to play another home game and an important game for us.
Josie Jewell added to that, saying that the team made their corrections today and it's time to move on to week 2.
We lost the game yesterday, made the corrections today. And people always talk about the 24-hour rule and stuff like that. And now that we watched it, now that we all talked about it, it's time to let it go. Yeah, it sucks. First game, you don't want to lose, especially Raiders, AFC game. So now it's time to move on, and everybody's got to be on the same page of trying to beat Washington. And that's what we're going to try to do. And we're going to keep our nose to the grindstone and worry about them and not worry about the last game.
Now joining me here in the Broncos podcast studio for a game recap is Broncos lead writer Eric Dellala. Eric, a close one this Sunday. Unfortunately, the Broncos didn't get the win to open up their season, but there were a lot of positives to take out of the game. First off, this offense got off to a faster start, and the Broncos scored on their season opening drive for the first time since 2008.
Yeah, long time, huh?
That's a long time, yeah.
Surprising that went all the way through the Peyton Manning era.
Yeah,
and
that's
never
a good
scored
point.
on the first drive of the season.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're
Thank
right.
you for that stat, too.
You're welcome.
You're the one who told me about
our
that.
friend Tyler Gorse pulled it initially, so I'll give him credit. I think the offense looked better, obviously.
Yeah.
And I think there were several signs of that. The touchdown drive,
Right.
the 2-minute touchdown right before halftime, obviously, that put the Broncos in the lead. Their third down efficiency close to 50%.
Mm-hmm.
You look at the fact that they had 2 drives of over 8 minutes, 2 scoring drives. Right. Only 1 3 and out, and every other drive they picked up at least 3 first downs. I mean, they possessed the ball well. It just didn't ultimately lead to all that many points or a win, unfortunately. And that had to do partially with the lack of explosive plays, just 2 plays of 20 yards or more, and those were for 20 and 21 yards respectively. So you didn't see the huge chunk plays that you see sometimes. That was part of the Raiders, I think, defensive strategy. But yeah, the offense looked better, and I think especially compared to last year at this time, because granted, what we're seeing right now, Sid, is not a finished product. We're going to continue to see it improve.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot to be encouraged about, particularly on the offensive side of the football.
For sure. And something that's been talked about a lot today, Eric, we heard from head coach Sean Payton earlier in the show about how unusual it was for this team to have 6 possessions on Sunday, both the Broncos and the Raiders, too. I mean, when you look at that, I mean, typically in a game, a team has 10 possessions or more?
Yeah, 10, 12. I mean, 8 is a low.
Is low, right.
And I think I saw a stat that since 2000, at least, which is when the data goes back to, Broncos have never had a game with this few possessions. And listen, part of that was holding the ball and moving the ball down the field well on offense. Part of it was the fact that the defense did give up some long drives. And Josie Jewell talked about that on Monday, that, hey, we've got to get off the field on third down and give our offense a few more chances, because points per possession, scoring on 3 of the 6 drives, certainly an encouraging output, but you just need a few more opportunities, or you've got to be pretty close to perfect. And Sean Payton talked about that too, that when you play a game with that few drives, that few possessions, the margin for error just gets a lot smaller. And unfortunately, a missed extra point, a missed field goal, a couple of maybe defensive lapses, those sorts of things come back and bite you, and you end up, I got the box score in front of me, and you look down at it, they had the same number of first downs. They had the exact same third down efficiency. They had the difference in net yards was 1. I mean,
my gosh.
You go down and both teams played essentially the same game.
Right.
And you kind of expect that in a 1-point game, but the Broncos didn't make the mistakes that the Raiders did. Like the Raiders threw a pick in the end zone.
Right.
They had that big penalty on Riley Dixon that extended a Broncos drive and gave the Broncos a chance to add a field goal. It just felt like they were 2 of 4 in the red zone instead of 2 of 3. It felt like the Raiders made more mistakes, and yet they come away with the victory. And we heard Sean Payton say, when you win in rushing, you win in the penalty yards. Mm-hmm. You figure you're going to look up, turnovers. You figure you're going to look up and win the football game, and for whatever reason, it didn't happen.
Right. Eric, you mentioned the penalties. The Broncos had 10 for 83 yards. How much do you feel like those really impacted yesterday's game?
Certainly a couple of them really did. That Kareem Jackson unnecessary roughness penalty. It's a tough one, right? It's a bang play. He's got to make a stop. You've got to get them off the field. Certainly not trying to hurt anybody. But that was a big one. Aseng Bassi's roughing the passer call that, I understand by the letter of the law, maybe it's right, but he's putting a hit on the quarterback as he's letting go of the football.
Yeah.
that obviously turned a big play for the Raiders into an even bigger play and moved them down into range where they ended up scoring a touchdown a few plays later.
Right.
Those were some big ones. I mean, there was one on Justin Simmons earlier in the game, personal foul-wise, that, it led to a touchdown, but they had gotten a first down on third down anyway, so it wasn't as big of a deal in my mind. But, you've got to clean some things up. There's some things, especially pre-snap, you don't want to see. Some of those penalties are going to happen, right? And you live with some of those, but you want to get that number down a little bit. And like we mentioned before, when the margin is so slim, a penalty here, a penalty there can be the difference. And
For sure.
Unfortunately, especially on that last drive, it was one of the differences.
Yeah. Eric, looking back at some of the positives, I know wide receiver Cortland Sutton, he praised the offensive line and running backs for their performance last night after the game. So, Eric, I want to look at Javonte Williams and Samaje Perine. I mean, they both looked fast, tough. I mean, hard to tackle. But it was really impressive to see not only what they could do on the ground in the ground game, but in the passing game as well.
Yeah, and they both got, especially Samaje, got better as the game went on. And I think you saw him, the Broncos' last scoring drive. Right. The Broncos kind of wore him down a little bit. Some big runs by Samaje Perine. I was surprised, maybe a little bit, that in that that final drive there, Sid, where the Broncos not final drive, but where they had a field goal, they get down to the 8-yard line and then throw the ball 3 consecutive times after you've just had some success with Samaje running the football. So we heard from Samaje on Monday, and he said he thinks that can be a strength of this team, especially late in games. Run the football, have some success with him and Javonte. I was impressed with both of them. Maybe a little bit. I mean, Jaleel McLaughlin got put in a couple of tough situations, but at some point you'd like to see his speed help the Broncos out. Maybe that's a way to get some of these explosive plays that Denver was missing. But yeah, the running game was solid. The pass protection was solid. I mean, Max Crosby he obviously disrupted one drive and turned it from a 1st and 10 inside the 40-yard line to a punt and 3rd and 35 or whatever it was. So we know how good he can be, but he didn't disrupt the entire game. And they were able to move the ball. So from an offensive line standpoint, pass protection and run blocking, I thought it was nicely done. Yeah,
well, we also heard head coach Sean Payton talk today about really the lack of pass rush on Sunday. The Broncos didn't register a single sack versus the Raiders. So, Eric, how do you want to see them kind of focus on that moving forward?
Yeah, some of it is situational, right? I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo gets rid of the ball quickly. The Broncos did not put the Raiders in a lot of 3rd and longs, which is going to hurt your opportunity to rush the passer. And I think in the first half there were just a couple times where it was more than 3rd and 1 or 2. There was a 3rd and 7. There was maybe a 3rd and 6. In the second half, there was a 3rd and 12 that would have been a good pass rushing opportunity. But overall, there weren't a ton of those chances.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And on a couple of those, he scrambled, obviously, right, for a first down on the last drive of the game, had one of those on the opening touchdown drive. So they flushed him out of the pocket a couple of times and were disruptive in that way. But you're right, didn't get a sack. So I said this, I think, yesterday and earlier when we were recording the neutral zone, is that if it happens next week against Washington and Sam Howell and it becomes a trend, maybe you worry a little bit more. This was a weird game in a lot of ways. And Sean Payton talked about different ways you can get pressure, whether it's guys winning one-on-one or bringing extra rushers or, having the proper coverage downfield to allow people to get there. I mean, all those things kind of come into consideration. And, the Broncos were still able to disrupt some plays, but the pressure is something you're going to be looking for this week in particular. And can guys like Randy Gregory, Frank Clark, Zach Allen, can they make more of an impact? Because certainly on that last drive in particular, if you can get to Jimmy and take him down, maybe you get a chance at going to win the football game. For sure. Yeah, Eric, we saw, Denver's defense pretty much contain Jimmy Garoppolo and the Raiders offense for most of the afternoon, really until the fourth quarter. You mentioned that the Raiders, final scoring drive, that 6-play, 75-yard touchdown drive. How did you kind of see the tempo change for the defense on that drive? Yeah, it's about having urgency, right? And the Broncos go up 16-10, and at that point, the feeling, at least where I was, is that, the Broncos are in control of this game. And even as the Raiders started to move the football, it didn't feel like the Broncos were in danger necessarily of giving up a quick drive, because the previous drives had taken a long time to move down the field. And so, a penalty couple of chunk plays, and before you know it, the Raiders have the lead again. And it just kind of, it was like a momentary lapse almost. Like that was the only drive really where you saw the Broncos. And I know they didn't get off the field there, but on that final drive, but that scoring drive was the only real quick drive where either team had chunk plays. And it just goes to show you that any drive can change the outcome of a football game.
Yeah.
They've got to be locked in there and find a way to get a stop, especially, you go up 16-10, you get the ball back, maybe you get a chance to push it to 2 possessions and essentially ice the game there. And instead, facing a deficit and go 3 and out as an offense, only 3 and out of the day and at a poor time, obviously. But again, I think that's part of a lot of people have been asked the last 24 hours about learning how to win and close out games. That's part of it. You can't, from an offensive standpoint, you've got to find a way to get 7 there in the red zone. And then defensively, you've got to find a way to come up with a stop.
For sure. Well, it seems like the message heading into this week to week 2 is that, it's just week 1. It's just the first game of the season here. So, it's not time to hit the panic button. It's still a long season, and the goal is just to get better week by week.
Yeah, no doubt. You don't want to dismiss a loss, right? Because you want to win your home games and division games. And Cortland Sutton, I think, said that well, that hey, this is not just another game. Like we really wanted to get this one, but lingering over it doesn't help anybody at this point. And you've got to look to guys like a Mike McGlinchey, who's done this before and has suffered a week 1 loss or early season losses and move forward to have successful seasons. And if you're these guys, you can't. It's easy for fans to kind of look back at the last several years and say, here we go again. Players can't do that. You've got to keep it separate from the last several years.
Right.
You've got to be encouraged by some of the things that this team did well, clean up the other stuff, and get ready for a big game against Washington, because you do really need a win this weekend when the Commanders come to town.
Yep. Well, the players have the day off tomorrow and Tuesday, and they'll look to turn the page to Washington Wednesday. Eric, appreciate you joining the show today.
You got it, Sydney.
And Broncos fans, don't forget, Paramount Plus is your streaming home to catch every local NFL and CBS game this season. Visit ParamountPlus.com to start your free trial and stream Russell Wilson and the team as they look to battle the league's best. Plus, get an all-access pass to 24/7 NFL content with CBS Sports HQ, Fantasy Football Today, NFL Slime Time, and more. And this year, Paramount Plus is your streaming destination for Super Bowl 58. Another action-packed Broncos season with the NFL on CBS awaits, so stream Paramount Plus from any device all season long. Well, that'll do it for today's episode of Broncos Now. Broncos Country, thanks so much for tuning in. I'll meet you right back here on the Broncos Podcast Network and YouTube for another episode tomorrow. And the Hall of Famer Steve Atwater is joining the show, so if you have any questions for him, please submit them below.